I'm going to trust you guys. All right, got it. Professionals over there. Okay. All right. So my name is Skip Mann, Managing Director in Lenovo's Chief Security Office. I've been with Lenovo for about 4 years. Prior to joining Lenovo, I spent almost a little over 2.5 decades in the U.S. government, working across the span of, I was in the Air Force for 10 years, got out of the Air Force just for 9/11. Got picked up by the Department of Homeland Security shortly after 9/11. Did that for a couple of years, helped stand up the TSA. I'll talk about that in the slides a little bit. Left there, ended up in the DoD as a contractor for a couple of years, and then I entered civil service in the DoD, where I eventually became an executive for about 13 years. I think that's all I'll say about that one. You want to just introduce yourself, John?
Absolutely. My name is Jon Durkos. Nice to meet you all. I've been with Lenovo for about 5 weeks, so I'm still drinking through the fire hose. I came from the Central Intelligence Agency, where I spent over 25 years as an operations officer, and I'm happy to be here and happy to answer your questions and provide you some background on Lenovo.
Thanks, John.
Yep.
So I think this is, I've been talking to John. I mean, John's been working for me for about, a month and a half now, I think it is. One of my most phenomenal hires ever. I'll toot my own horn. This
Only hire.
Yeah, only hire. One and only hire, best hire. So you see the word cow on the screen here. So as I was kind of figuring out what we were going to come up here and talk about today, I was reflecting back on my 33 years in this profession. And if you back up 30 years, the first time I ever got on a stage or in front of people, is everyone familiar with the drug abuse resistance education, the DARE officers that law enforcement people do? When I was a young troop in the Air Force, I was in the security forces. I became a DARE officer. They shoved about 6 of us on a plane, sent us to Topeka, Kansas. That was okay. Topeka's okay. I'll just say that. We get up in front of the crowd. I somehow was the youngest one there. So all of these, hardened law enforcement officers are like, you're going first. So what they made us do was go into a can or a bucket and pull out a piece of paper. And on my piece of paper was the word cow. And they said, now you have to speak for 5 minutes straight and don't stop. So again, throwing you into the wolves' den. So 5 minutes passed by. It seemed like 20 seconds because the immediate thing that came to my mind was cow tipping. I won't purport that I've ever cow tipped before, but I had at least 15 minutes of cow tipping stories to share with that group. Kind of fast forward 30 years. Every time I get on a stage, I kind of get the butterflies and stuff, but that was my forte into this. But I think today's also a momentous occasion because you've got the 25-year CIA operations officer veteran who typically does not get in front of human beings on stages. This is his first time on a stage. So.
Yes, so this is a historic day for me. It's my first talking event, and I was talking to Skip earlier today, and I said, I spent the last 25 years being quiet and shutting up because I couldn't say anything. So being married 20 years, it sort of goes along the same lines where I shut up and I shake my head, and so it's my first time actually being in front of a crowd, so no tomatoes, no hecklers, please. We'll save it for after that chat. Thank you.
All right, cool. All right, so let's kind of jump into this. I don't know what was in your mind when you saw Hacking Humans as the title of this. I think we're taking Hacking Humans outside the box a little bit in terms of what we're going to speak about today. Probably much different than you would have thought it would be. Again, I did a lot of sort of introspective, viewing of my career over the last 33 years. And really what I want to do is I want to really mesh hacking with social engineering, sort of the technical with the behavioral aspects of this, and kind of frame things in a little bit different way than just pure cybersecurity hacking. A lot of what we'll present today is based really on our experience over the last few decades of our careers. And I think one of the things that this made me do is step back a little bit, kind of smell the flowers, look at things at that 50,000 foot level from the standpoint of what I've seen throughout the last 30 years, how things have progressed from a security perspective globally, both public sector and private sector and everything in between. We're going to kind of delve into three areas. Hackers hacking humans is the first section. Second one, we're going to talk a little bit about how organizations are hacking humans. And then finally, we're going to kind of get introspective and talk about some ways for us to hack ourselves as leaders. All right, this first section really going to look at hacking humans, and I'm going to go into kind of from a historical perspective on this, and really just kind of put it in that historical perspective. Cyber is going to be a part of it, but that's not everything. But this will put cyber into perspective. So we're going to start off with a poll. How many people think this is a cool picture, or does this picture make you cringe? Who thinks it's cool? Raise of hands. Okay, there's a few. A lot of the younger guys. Who thinks this is the most cringy picture you've ever seen and should not ever be used in cybersecurity? Okay, I'm in that boat, okay? The vast preponderance of us think this is cringy. You're not going to see another one of these in this briefing. I feel like we portray cybersecurity in this way a lot, and I think it is detrimental to this profession. It's just my personal opinion. I cringe every time I see this. I've got guys on the team that like to use this stuff, and mostly I'm not trying to sort of age shame, but the younger guys love to use this stuff, right? They love the black hat stuff, all that kind of stuff. But if you ever researched hacking and you really looked into it, right? I think these are 4 hackers that, in my personal opinion, have historical significance to the word or to the definition of hacking. You look at the upper left there, Tim Winslow, right? He's been called the first hacker. He was a member of a hacking group out of the dangerous city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin in the 80s. They called themselves the 414s due to the Milwaukee area code. This was really one of the most significant hacking teams in the United States at the time. Between 82 and 83, they hacked Los Alamos National Laboratory, the Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, as well as the Security Pacific National Bank in that time. That was really the first time from a national security perspective that the country here in the United States, the law enforcement agencies were like, oh, we've got a new threat on our hands. And mind you, this is 82 and 83, right? Almost unheard of. I mean, I did a lot of research leading up to this. I'd never even heard of this guy, but definitely a significant person in the history of hacking. Below him is Robert Morris. In 98, he essentially created the Morris worm, the first virus that we saw. He had no ill intentions of creating this code, but it ended up taking on a life of its own, affected about 6,000 computers and about $100 million worth of damage. Not a great thing. And then Natasha Grigori, right? So she is really one of the female pioneers in hacking. She started her hacking career in the early 80s. Again, you're going to see a theme throughout this, and I am a male. I don't know what it is with men. We hack, and then we go to jail. Women start hacking and then do great things. So I think we need more females in this profession, I'll be honest with you, because they all end up turning great. She actually started kind of taking a stand against child pornography. Her website, antichildporn.org, is still out there. She passed away in 2005, but has since become almost a cult status among hackers, especially the females. And then finally, in the upper right, Xiao Qian is the founder of the all-female hacking group China Girl Security Team, numbering in the 2000s. Of recent times, she is probably the most famous female hacker out there. She does all kinds of damage from a hacking perspective. They like to deface a lot of websites. Now, we said we were meshing hacking and social engineering. So I'd be remiss if I don't kind of look at some of the most prolific social engineers in history, both ancient and modern. Upper left, Kevin Mitnick. Everyone should probably know him. People either love him or hate him. I was not a real fan of him. Again, he passed away about a month ago, for those of you that don't know, at 59. I actually did a webinar with him about a year and a half ago with Lenovo. Pretty decent person, but when you look at him, People either love him or hate this guy, but you cannot deny that he was a fantastic social engineer. Below him, right, going all the way back to Greek mythology, you have Odysseus, right? Great Pan-Hellenic hero, oratory, very, very good talker in terms of shaping that Greek victory in the Trojan War. And then, another one there, right? Frank Abagnale, right? Catch Me If You Can. The movie was based on his life. I actually watched the Johnny Carson interview of him back in, I want to say it was probably late 60s, early 70s. This guy was a fantastic social engineer. Posed as a pediatrician for over a year. Posed as an airline pilot to fly free everywhere he went. Was cashing checks into the hundreds of thousands of dollars over the span of his career, right? And now, he turned good, and now he's making even more money doing what he's doing now. But I think on this slide, I want to just point out the most prolific social engineer in the history of the world, in my opinion. I don't even need to name this guy. You look at him, he crafted a web portal, lured millions of people into his lair, so to speak, into his pocket by establishing confidence and trust from the standpoint of his Facebook page. Then he facilitated them to divulge secrets of their lives, from personal information to videos, media, everything in between. And he did this legally. He sold it all, right? Prolific social engineer, in my opinion. I'll say nothing else about that. I don't want to end up in a defamation suit. So this all boils down to trust, right? I mean, trust is that glue of life, as the statement says down there, the quote says. What if you could develop an algorithm that could essentially make that trust part of the equation vulnerable? That is exactly what social engineering is. It basically observes personal mentalities, reoccurring routines, relationships, and then the social engineer develops appearance of an individual you might naturally trust. Let's go back to the Trojan War, right? The Trojan horse, right? This has evolved over centuries, right? So when you look at Odysseus, right, circling back to him and what he did, it is literally the definition of social engineering, in terms of how the trust is the underpinning element of that social engineering scheme. Gaining the enemy's trust, use that trust to gain access to a securely protected place through deception of appearance, almost a verbatim definition of social engineering. I think you could also define this as a sort of a red teaming experiment as well, right? We've done this in red teaming in the government a lot. So this is where I'm going to kind of go off on a little bit of a tangent, right? My background, I spent 10 years in the U.S. Air Force. I was in the 1990s, so I came in right in Desert Shield, Desert Storm was kicking off. I was in the Air Force when this unfolded. We had an entire squad from Kirtland Air Force Base in that exact building. So essentially, for those of you that don't know this building, this is Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia. In 1996, we had about 500 or plus coalition troops in this facility. Essentially, we deployed to Saudi Arabia. As we were contracting with the Saudi government, they said there's no need for you to conduct surveillance detection or patrols outside the perimeter. We've got it, you're safe. Fast forward a few weeks, Hezbollah detonates a vehicle-borne IED outside the perimeter fence, which was a little bit behind where you see the police officer standing there, so pretty close to the building, and essentially killed 19 U.S. Air Force personnel and about 498 members of the coalition forces that were housed in there. This incident resulted in two things, right? Our trust in the Saudi government waned drastically after this, but what this was is a forcing function for the U.S. DoD and the State Department, really the two bigger agencies that were carrying out anti-terrorism measures at the time, to make sweeping changes in anti-terrorism strategy, policy, standards, et cetera, across the board from a DoD and State Department perspective. So what did we do? 1998, this is a picture of, I was actually working in this building at the time. DoD and State Department started spending millions and millions of dollars putting bollards around every priority level resource out there. This actually is the headquarters Pacific Air Forces building at Hickam Air Force Base, Hawaii. That's the main entrance. If you look on the left side of the building on the second floor there, that's where I worked. At the time, I was the security advisor to General Pat Gamble. I essentially was his protective service operations officer. That window right there is actually the 3-star deputy commander of U.S. Pacific Air Forces. The 4 stars office is just to the left of that. Now, if you look at this, right, I mean, the reason we put these bollards up was to create standoff, right? Essentially protect the endpoint in cyber terms, right? This is essentially what the anti-terrorism strategy was. But if you could just think about it, looking at the Khobar Towers picture, there was some pretty decent standoff on that building. This is literally 15, 20 feet from the building. If a VBID would have been detonated outside the PACAF building at any point, it would have killed probably half the people in that wing right there. Now, you know, from the standpoint of that initiative, right? I mean, in my career, I saw bollards go up around command centers, command posts, headquarters buildings, medical groups, chapels. I mean, we spent millions and millions and millions of dollars putting standoff and bollards around our facilities on the bases. The money ran out really quickly. So what did we do? We pivoted our strategy and we decided to start protecting our perimeter, right? Sounds familiar, right? You look pre-COVID, from a cyber perspective, we were protecting our perimeter. Fast forward through COVID, everyone starts working remotely, the endpoint becomes our new perimeter. I'll purport that, is it still the new perimeter? But I think that's probably something for the panel later on today. Now, what did we do, right? We began pivoting our budgets and spending our money on pop-up bollards and sort of fortifying gates into choke points and such. So at the perimeters of military installations, we created choke points with either bollards, barriers, what have you, and then we put up pop-up barriers to prevent gate runners and such from penetrating the installation, right? Again, millions of dollars spent, lots of taxpayers' dollars probably went into this, I'm assuming. I spent a lot of taxpayers' dollars, I'll admit. I was the anti-terrorism officer at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base for a few years. We put bollards and pop-up barriers pretty much everywhere on the base. So what did the terrorists do? The hackers, right? They went ahead and showed us that they were playing chess while we were playing checkers. Again, they socially engineered their way into flight schools. They figured out how to circumvent airport security. Incredible changes in attack vector. Put us on our heels. Essentially, this was a true definition of what I would define as an asymmetric threat. You know, I think when you look at that, again, I remember the day where I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I just gotten on the Air Force. I saw this. I said, you know, I've got to do something about this. So what did we do? We created from scratch one of the largest government agencies in the history of Earth, right? I was one of the first 1,000 employees in the TSA. I can say that it was quite interesting. Sweeping changes in airport security, pretty much upheaving everything that was in place with the various contracted screeners and such. The US government drastic legislation that really, to me, was at best a massive privacy violation or invasion, but it is what it is, right? Drastic situations call for drastic measures. You know, when I mentioned that I was there in the TSA, I spent almost 2 years sort of helping federalize airports. I'm going to tell you that there are patriots in the TSA. We all sort of make fun of them. They do not have an easy job. It's not an easy job, I'll just say that. And again, there's attrition and things of that nature you just have to be cognizant of. But I think for the most part, like looking pre-9/11 to now, I think we're better off and we're more secure from an airport security perspective. But having been there to witness this unfold over those first 2 years of the TSA being formed, and I know this is being recorded, hopefully we can delete this, but I mean, just between us, I mean, it was a breech birth, pun intended. I mean, it was not an easy rollout, and they're still sort of working through things, you know, even this many years later. So we're going to back up a second, right? So I don't know, is anyone in here, do you remember these two magazines way back in 1999 that came out, Time Magazine and Newsweek? Y2K, right? The cyber apocalypse is what it was called, as you know, Time Magazine sort of depicts on there. Lots of unclear strategies, positions, et cetera on this. It turned into a massive debacle. I was at Headquarters Pacific Air Forces working for the general at the time. I think as with the 9/11 attacks, I can recall the day, January 31st, 1999, I was in the PACAF Command Center with the 4-star, the 3-star, and all the other general officers. On that day, pretty much, I would say the Air Force was in a DEFCON 5 situation. I mean, everything was on alert globally. We did not know what was going to happen. When it came to it, midnight hit, nothing happens. 1 o'clock comes and passes, again, nothing. Another 6 hours kind of passed by, still nothing, and then we kind of stood down and went home and went to bed, right? But when you look at that from the standpoint of that, this is what the website was. I actually went on the Wayback Machine and found this. It actually, I went to every one of these links. It was so intriguing. So think about where we're at right now in terms of our posture from a cybersecurity perspective in a nation-state global sort of perspective. This one on the left is actually the homepage of the Y2K site, y2k.gov, right? Pretty awesome, in my opinion. I mean, really, really fantastic. I couldn't even get the graphics version to load. I don't think Wayback Machine has it, but there was 3 or 4 graphics. I think one of them was of President Clinton or something like that. But what I wanted to bring your attention to was the contingency planning page that you drill into right here. And this is the latest version, right? This is just before Y2K kicked off. Look at the government agencies listed. There's only a handful there. Some of them are double, triple taps of organizations. Look at the state and local governments. Minnesota and the state of Texas were the only 2 out of 50 states that had any sort of contingency planning in place. And then organizations. What gave me the biggest laugh was the first one listed there. The National Retail Federation was uber prepared for Y2K. They were ready to sell, wares and clothes and whatever they were going to sell. But when you think about that, right, this is literally 23 years ago. I mean, and then you kind of look at it and kind of fast forward from the perspective of what else was going on at that time. So I found this particular gentleman. His name is Jonathan James. Kind of putting the U.S. national cyber preparedness aside from the standpoint of what was going on at that time. In 1999, just before Y2K kicked off, he went in and hacked NASA. Ended up getting into the Marshall Space Flight Center's network and ended up pretty much extracting massive amounts of data on the International Space Station. Stuff that was controlling their physical environment, temperature, humidity control within the living space, et cetera. Fast forward to 2007, massive hacks were going down at Boston Market, Barnes & Noble, OfficeMax, and other companies. So the Secret Service came in and investigated him. Because at the time, we didn't have a whole laundry list of people to go shake down in terms of cyber issues. So they met with him, and then shortly after he was investigated, they found him dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound with a suicide note that essentially said, I don't want to be accused of any future stuff, even though I'm not doing it. So kind of a casualty, but also sort of what was going on at that time. I think more importantly, David Lee Smith here, right? He was the gentleman who actually hijacked the AOL account and used it to post a file on the internet news group altsex.com. Essentially, he posted a letter out there in Microsoft Word promising dozens of passwords for adult-related entertainment sites. Essentially, all said and done, what happened was this letter just took off like wildfire. People were downloading it, and it essentially became an automated chain letter, which ended up doing an estimated $80 million worth of damage to systems throughout the United States. Then in 2002, he was actually tried and convicted. He got a whopping 20 months in prison, had to pay $5,000. This was very similar to the Morris worm that I talked about early on a couple slides. This was dubbed the Melissa virus. Really was a double-edged sword historically for the United States, right? This was a precursor for all sorts of madness to ensue in the coming years. But this was the first time where the FBI was like, wow, we might need to do something about this. So shortly after he was convicted, the FBI actually stood up their National Cyber Division. So at that point, right, we started really, really thinking about this. But again, you're talking 20 years ago at this point. Now, I'm not going to kind of go into the rest of the history since then, but I feel like, looking back and pondering this over that last 2 decades, the monumental evolution of technology, the thing that I really have noticed since I started in this profession was we've seen a drastic shift in dynamics of what security is and where the focus is, really from a truly physical perspective back in mid to late 90s, early 2000s to a logical focus, right? I mean, you just have to look at this graphic. I mean, I downloaded this on a Saturday, last Saturday, and this was what was going on at the time that I downloaded 2 minutes of this. I think when you look at this, I mean, cyber is here. It's the persistent threat. It's going to continue. I think one of the things that I've realized is that from a cyber perspective, I still scratching my head in terms of cyber incidents are almost always determined to be non-hostile, non-kinetic. But when you really look at it, there is a credible threat and credible capability out there to leverage the cyber domain to go kinetic. And to me, that is one of the things from my perspective that keeps me awake at night. Another thing that I want to kind of point out is that from a human perspective, the humans are in control of this, right? I mean, humans are still a valid sort of piece of this entire equation from the standpoint of they're not only our weakest link and greatest risk, but it's an opportunity for us to sort of focus our attention on the humans in various ways. As leaders, we're only as strong as that weakest link. So again, I've been on this sort of human dynamic sort of rampage over the last couple of years in terms of security. I think collectively it's going to take a village to kind of get after this piece. But when you really kind of look at it, I mean, I think Winston Churchill sums the thoughts up right here, right? I think we do continually repeat history. Looking back at my anti-terrorism days, I mean, we were protecting the endpoint, then we're like, no, we can't afford this. We got to protect the perimeter. The perimeter is better. The enemy's farther out from the resource, that sort of stuff, right? So I think we have got to absolutely keep up to speed in terms of that changing threat dynamic out there. So organizations hacking humans, right? I think when you look at this in the organizational context, again, sort of looking at it as a collective community of like-minded professionals, we've got to work together because those with nefarious objectives are going to continue to exploit the humans, whether we like it or not. It's going to continue to perpetuate. You look at nation states, you look at terrorist organizations. I mean, these are humans that have hacked humans for reprehensible objectives. I don't need to name them all, but I did want to point out the upper right there. You guys probably don't know who that is. That's Junaid Hussain, one of the leaders in ISIS's cyber caliphate. This guy is a hacker of hackers. This guy is a phenomenal hacker, but his social engineering skills are off the charts. I was in a position previously at an organization where we tracked him. We neutralized him in a drone attack, thank goodness, but not before he recruited countless individuals into the ISIS cyber caliphate. Okay, kind of looking at it from a cyber perspective, I listed 10 organizations here. Again, you're going to see some logos that you probably haven't seen before. There's hundreds of organizations out there that are focused on this stuff for virtuous or wicked reasons, depending on where you sit, right? Anonymous, well-known entity, kind of organized to fight the privacy fight. WikiLeaks, we all know what WikiLeaks is all about, right? Publishing classified information, et cetera, out there for everyone to know, whistleblower type stuff. Shadow brokers, TSB, lots of NSA leaks from TSB. Double Dragon, or how we know them in the government, APG41, Chinese hacking group, with ties to the MSS, the Ministry of State Security. Lizard Squad, this was an interesting one because before my time at Lenovo, the Lizard Squad actually hacked Lenovo's website and defaced it. They're no longer in existence, thank goodness, but they embarrassed the company I'm currently with at one point. Lots of DDoS attacks on gaming, sort of Xbox, that type of stuff is what they were doing. Lizard Squad, again, Black Hat hacking group from the standpoint of DDoS attacks to disrupt, Lazarus Group is really a North Korean hacking group from that perspective. Then you have, let me see here. Oh, I do need to point this out. So tailored access operations of NSA, right? When you look at our friend Edward Snowden, you can call him a traitor or a whistleblower, again, wherever you sit. Had he not done what he did, we would have never known about TAO. Probably one of the strongest organizations on earth, in my opinion, based on some of the stuff that I've seen. Probably pretty much have every bit of American telephone information that's ever been had. Again, I'm trying to paint a sort of a dual picture on this in terms of this, right? because there's other nation states that are friendly to us that are looking at us from the standpoint of us hacking. We're all hacking each other at a government level. It's just the way it goes. Bottom left there is Syrian Electronic Army, or SEA, right? Obviously, Syrian sympathies, connections to Iran and Hezbollah. And then Fancy Bear or Cozy Bear, whichever one you want to take, they're pretty much synonymous. Russian intelligence agencies, and then Conti should be well known, right? One of the most prolific ransomware groups out there from that perspective. Now, and then you've got the CIA. I think I know a guy, so I'm going to turn it over to you and kind of maybe share some social engineering stories with us or something?
I'll try.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Can I have your clicker? Click.
Oh, here, yeah, the clicker.
Thank you.
That would help, wouldn't it?
Appreciate it. That would not have been a good start. Thanks again for having me. But so, as I mentioned earlier, I spent just over 25 years as an operations officer, also known as a case officer with the CIA. And I'm going to focus more on the human interactions versus the hacking side of things in terms of an agency perspective. Does anyone know what an operations officer, or also known as a case officer, does? Raise your hand. You're on the spot. Okay, what do we do? Here, come on up here. You're going to help me with my presentation. But yeah, so that's really close. And so this is what we are not. Anyone recognize this individual? We do have prizes, so do chime in. So this is who we are not. We're not the Jason Bournes of the world. He is someone who's considered a spy. We are not spies. We are the ones who go out and meet and assess and develop and recruit people who do go out and spy for us and conduct espionage. So we are not the spies ourselves. We go out and recruit those folks. And we do that by, you'll hear me say this a lot, relationships, trust, and rapport. And how we do that, we meet the individual, we assess them, we develop them for possibly a year, 2 years, and then we recruit them, and they are the actual spies. So we build that rapport, we build that trust, which you'll see a lot of within the slideshow. This is more like what we deal with. This is a colleague of mine who were in our tour in Afghanistan, and we were given a 5-star room by the U.S. military, 10th Mountain Division. We were provided with tarps, some lumber, some cardboard boxes as beds, 3 square MREs a day, some water, and you're probably asking, why is this slide up here? What the hell does it mean? Again, this is where we had to build trust. We had to build that rapport and relationship with the U.S. military. Any former U.S. mil guys in here? Anyone? Yeah, so you probably, if you ever dealt with the agency or agency folks, you probably thought we came in and we were the Jason Bournes and we were cool and all that other BS. That's not how it is. And once we got in front of them, we had to build that trust and rapport and relationship to where they trusted us and invited us to, these remote outbases where when, things went south, they expected us to fight along with them and be their partner there as well. And again, you'll see the trust is a big word here, and this is just a former CIA's quote. You go ahead and read it if you can't read it. And CIA can assure you that we're committed to earning that very trust every day. We know that we can take it for granted. We must continue to be as open as possible with the American people. American people, yes, but that trust also goes to developmentals or assets who have already been recruited. Because just up there with the security, trust plays a huge role in the relationship. So it not only goes to the American people with assets as well. Anyone name this movie? You are correct. So now I'm going to get into a high-level view of the recruitment cycle, and none of this is classified. You can find this in books and movies and et cetera, et cetera. So the first part is the initial contact or the assessment. We haven't gone as far as hanging upside down from the luggage racks in the airplane. Excuse my humor, but I just had to put these up. Hopefully you enjoy them. But the initial contact is where we set up a scenario or a social engineering scenario where we could bump into an individual, into a target, in a benign environment to where that individual does not feel threatened or their antennas do not go up saying, holy hell, the CIA is targeting me. So we do that in a non-alerting manner, in a benign manner. And the first thing that I did in my career was to get that person to breathe, because if you're being approached by a U.S. government representative or a pseudo researcher or some other cover, that pucker factor is really high at that point. So the first thing I like to do with anyone is to get them to breathe and then make them feel comfortable in a conversation. And again, these can take place on airplanes, in airports, luggage claim, train stations, bus stations, malls, any public location. So there are plenty of opportunities out there to bump people. And in looking at someone, if you're going to bump them, you do an online search. Okay, is there anything out there on Facebook, on LinkedIn, Instagram, or any other open forum where this person shows interest in this, or he or she's a sports fan, or into kites, collecting coins, a sports team? You look at all those different things to build into your approach to where you're in that approach and you make that initial conversation, you break that ice. You could use whatever you found in your search during that interaction. If the person is a Utah Jazz fan, you may have a Utah Jazz jersey on or something along those lines, and you're not going out saying, hey, I'm CIA, I'm here to bump you. We typically use various covers, USG, just to make them more comfortable. So you can wear jerseys, you can bring up kite flying if they're interested in kites. So there's a myriad of things that you can bring up just to break that ice and make them feel comfortable and build that initial rapport and build that conversation. Anyone name this movie? Very good. Step Brothers. You ride bikes too? So this is during the developmental phase. And you ride bikes too. That could be you collect stamps too, you paraglide too, you watch basketball, you go to baseball games, you do whatever, sewing, whatnot. We use what we utilize in that first initial bump to make that initial conversation, to break the ice into getting that second meeting, to say, hey, would you like to go to the basketball game? Would you like to go kite flying, et cetera, et cetera. And these things, you do become the best friend, because this happens over 10, 12, 14 months, the whole process. So it's not quick. So you really do become best friends. So any questions up to this point? Yeah. So you just do like a shit ton of research on kite flying before you talk to them? Absolutely. If you know they're into kite flying, you figure out what clubs are near you, what kind of kites they have, long tail, short tail, what will stay up in 10-mile-an-hour winds versus 35-mile-an-hour winds. So yes, do your homework, do your targeting, do your research. Yes, absolutely. And again, this takes several years or not several years, but several months, up to a year, maybe even more, to develop that rapport and that relationship and that trust.
Yeah, hi. How often can they call your bluff?
It depends on where they're coming from and what their occupation is. I would say if they're from a country, an adversary country, where they have a tendency to know our approaches and so forth, those aren't as successful as the ones where if it's a student or someone in a lab or something along those lines. So I would say 50-50. And even if they could call our bluff, you have to realize that some of these folks would like to work for the agency or work for Western intelligence agency. So even though they can call your bluff, they may still be open to that relationship. So even if they call BS, they could say, hey, wait a second, let's go fly a kite. So, and some just immediately turn their back and go the other way. So that happens a lot as well. But if you're batting, 100, you're doing well. Like baseball, you bat 300, you're in the Hall of Fame. If you're batting 100 in the agency with recruitments, you're doing well. So 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20, you're okay. Anything else? So this development happens over a course of, like I said, 10 months, 12 months, a year or so. And you do become best friends. You build that rapport. You build that trust. The individual starts trusting you to the point where they start talking about things that you may be interested in, aka their work and where they're at and what they do. So what we do is we try to make that transition. They'll usually give us a door. They'll say, okay, I'm doing X at what lab, or I'm working on X missile at X, Y, and Z lab or missile facility. So that's when we take that conversation and we steer it in another direction to be more operationally advantageous to us. So and it's all based on the trust and relationship between the two parties. And then all that developmental work and all that rapport building and that trust and that friendship, et cetera, comes down to the recruitment. And anyone college football fan? Ohio State fan? Oh boy. So this one is, I put this in specifically for Skip because he was born and raised in the state of Michigan. I can't say the first letter. So he's an Michigan Wolverine fan, which is the nemesis of Ohio State. So I had to put that up there, which basically shows the recruitment. So this is where the two parties engaged in the relationship, the agency and the potential asset, they've worked for several months, up to a year, even more, and the person is fully committed. They have provided information of interest up to this point, and it's essentially time to bring that person on officially as a team of the CIA and to start conducting espionage. And it's very similar to college sports in their recruiting. We have a star high school athlete, which translates into a star target, and then you go out into the college courts the athlete and builds that trust and builds that friendship, like the agency going out and build that trust and that relationship with the developmental. And then finally, the school offers them a contract or scholarship, and they accept, and the agency is the same way, where we go out and recruit them, and they accept, and they're fully recruited. So it's a lot like college sports. And I had one story that I wanted to share in terms of showing what that trust and that relationship and that rapport building does in a positive way or negative at the end of the story, you decide. So I was working with one individual. This was probably 14 months into it, and the relationship was going great, great rapport, great friendship, a lot of trust. In this particular country, these individuals, you're friends with them for life if you become friends. So everything was going great, was to the point of recruitment, and had all the approvals in place. So go out to meet with this individual. So we sit down, we go over the relationship, over the history, talk about the plus and minuses, and in the end I said, I got approval from headquarters that, okay, we can now officially move this relationship to the next level, and you can become part of the team. And the guy just he saw a ghost. And at that point I dropped my cover. I said, you've been meeting with CIA this whole time, and you're going to talk about crapping your pants. He essentially did that. But it looked like he had seen a ghost, and I was like, oh boy, this is not good. Looks like I'll be going home early for dinner. So anyways, after a couple of minutes of just staring at each other, he finally spoke up and he said, John, it's been great. I had a really good time. I think we're doing a lot of good things. But he said, I thought I was already part of the team. So based on that relationship and that trust and that rapport building, he thought he was part of, the CIA team, 6 months before that. So that just shows how building that rapport and those relationships and those friendships matter in the end. So I was able to backpedal and just explain it was a lot of administrative type of work. So in the end, everything was good, everything was fine. But that was a little iffy. And so the next phase is handling. This is where, again, sorry for the graphics. And this is where the asset and the agency, ride off into the sunset and conduct their espionage activities. So in the end, everything is in order and everything is great, and then they go off and conduct espionage for however long this lasts.
Okay. I do have a question for you now that
Yes.
I'm thinking about this. So when you were at the agency,
Yeah.
would you have defined yourself as a chameleon, or
Yes.
how does that sort of rest with you?
Yes. So in terms of a chameleon, many different examples. So for example, your target, where are they from? Are they from Pakistan? Are they from, Africa continent? Are they from, Europe? You have to adapt and adjust to that particular personality and that culture at the same time, as well as, is this a nuclear scientist or a missile engineer or a politician or a financial person for a foreign government? So you have to pivot and swivel real quick.
Yeah.
You have to get smart on those things real quick. So there's always adapting, there's always changing that color. And you also have to adapt yourself to what's going to give me the best chance to succeed. Am I going to be a USG government employee, or am I going to be a researcher or a scientist, et cetera? So you really have to adapt, and you really have to change colors often.
Yeah, I learned so much about you just now. I'm not having second thoughts or anything, but yeah,
I was lying.
Just got to
the
watch
whole time.
myself from his social engineering prowess. I think when you look at the social engineering life cycle, right? I mean, that's pretty much what you just outlined, right?
So yeah, investigation is pretty much like the targeting, doing your research on the target. The hook is sort of that approach, and that playing is that developmental phase where you're building that relationship and that trust. And then the exit is basically the recruitment and the handling.
Yeah, interesting. When I personally look at this, I mean, this actually looks like every romantic relationship I've had in 35 years of dating and being married. Actually, strike that. I forgot this is being recorded, so strike that. My current relationship is fantastic. I love her so much. So, babe, if you watch this, I love you. But anyway, I mean, from a social engineering perspective, I mean, listen, we're leveraging social engineering here in the U.S. government. Others are leveraging social engineering, so on and so forth. I mean, this is what it's all about. So where's this all going, right? I think, from a security culture perspective, right, I've been on this culture kick as well. Again, let's look at some history from the standpoint of security culture in the modern day. From my perspective, right, we're working it in three sort of eras, the 60s through 90s, 90s through 2000s, and then 2000s to present, right? So when you looked at technology, sort of when it first came into existence, sorry, I'm messing this up. Sorry. Am I? I just jacked it up. Sorry, I'm managing by walking around. Primary design of the internet was accessibility, built on top of a tech stack that wasn't really designed to protect info. I mean, this is what we weren't thinking of, these nefarious things back then. Technology-based controls introduced to reduce risk. Firewalls and AV started kind of coming into existence, into the 90s, late 80s. And then kind of entered what I call the compliance focus era. Mid-90s through the early 2000s, started really focusing on risk from a legal perspective, from a compliance perspective. Industry and government regulations were really emerging, kind of based on some of those war stories I was telling earlier. New annual mandatory security training started emerging. The Click Your Way to Freedom PowerPoint decks that we remember back in those days. Training focused on, meeting minimum standard by regulation. Many orgs are really still operating like this nowadays, unfortunately. So kind of look at, as we're shifting, I think we're shifting into a human reality focus. And again, I should have caveated that I actually kind of borrowed this from the Security Culture Handbook. If anyone's familiar with Perry Carpenter and Kai Rohr, it's a fantastic book. I'd recommend reading it. But we've kind of been shifting toward this human focus, human reality focus, from the early 2000s to present, where we're starting to address and know that the realities of how humans interact with tech and with each other. It's, again, that 20-year span that I showed, that kind of cyber warfare chart, that graphic that was automated. It's literally a daily occurrence. Minute by minute occurrence, actually. We found that regulatory compliance was doing little to really stop the surge of ransomware. And then, obviously, we're finally in that point where we're acknowledging that everything revolves around one single element, the human, is really where I wanted to kind of take this, right? So, John, you want to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you see here, humans are everything to you. Like I mentioned before, we were tasked with going out and recruiting humans, and no matter what sort of technology you have, there's nothing better than having a human working with you. So here we decide what tech to purchase, decide what risks to focus on, determine process needs, controlling technology settings, running patch and maintaining security technologies, designing code in-house apps, reviewing third-party risk, and deciding how to respond to suspicious activity.
There's more.
Also, yes, absolutely. And everyone you hire, contract, interact with, or sell to us is human. Everything you design, sell, or develop business from is ultimately a service of humans. Everything and everyone in your organization is impacted by the decisions, behaviors, and expectations of other humans. So you get the theme here of humans.
I don't think we missed anything. I mean, it's pretty much about humans, I think. Is that what
Maybe
we're
humans
saying?
are involved in
Yeah,
everything. I
okay.
think maybe even
That's
AI.
what I thought.
Yes.
I think I didn't count how many times we said human there, but it's
Right.
a pretty phenomenal number.
And so I think, based on what we just discussed in the slides that you saw previously, it's, hacking a human yields the highest rate of return for hackers. And you see where the hacking the human is up at the upper right. Like I mentioned earlier, is you could have the best technology, you could have the best electronic collection capabilities or whatever collection methods that you think are the best, but the best case scenario, at least my experience, is that having a human on the other end, being able to provide that authoritative and that firsthand access, that knowledge, there's nothing that beats that, because you don't know who's on the other end manipulating that electronic signal and so forth. So having somebody who's able to speak to that and provide that human assessment on the other end is huge. And that's where the highest rate comes out.
Does everyone agree with us? Does anyone disagree with this? And it's okay to disagree. Anyone have any thoughts? No one. No thoughts at all? Someone raise their hand. Yeah.
Oh, it's the one who knows what a case officer is.
Yeah. Hey, get his card after this. We need to know who it is.
Yeah, so John, this question is for you.
Yep.
What are some of the human tendencies that you saw in the field that you were able to exploit that you see in the corporate industries as well?
Yep. So, I didn't talk about it earlier, which I should have hit on, is during that developmental phase, is that during these conversations in the relationship building, you tend to find vulnerabilities and motivations. And that could be anything from someone having a gambling problem where they need extra cash. So therefore, they may be more vulnerable to work with a nefarious actor or the CIA or a hacking organization. So people may have those vulnerabilities, from financial needs to drugs and alcohol, or motivations, or where we're not appreciated at the company. They're not appreciated by their superiors or the managers, to where somebody comes along and says, hey, I appreciate you, and then later on says, could you do X, Y, and Z for me? So along that developmental phase, you learn what vulnerabilities or what motivations that particular individual may have, and that could, run the gamut from, like I said.
Yeah, I think in terms of the chart, in terms of that attack vector being the human, there's stats that back that up from the standpoint of, show it up here in a second. So I'm sure everyone's aware of the Verizon data breach investigations report of the DBER. This last year, 2023, about 74% of breaches were basically through the humans in terms of that. One of the things that I was pretty excited about is that the 2023 report is actually down almost 8% over last year's report. Last year was, I think, 82% of breaches were attributed to the humans. So humans continue to be the element that's driving breaches, right? So from the standpoint of social engineering, error, privilege, misuse, stolen creds, things of that nature, it continues to sort of drive that. And if you don't believe anything else I've said, you've got to believe the godfather of cybersecurity, Bruce Schneier here. This is his quote, amateurs hack systems, professionals hack people. I think this is pretty fitting. If you haven't met him, he's actually a fantastic human being. Just absolute thought leader too. So what are we looking at time-wise, guys? I know, okay, 2 minutes? Oh crap, okay, we better step it up then. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to try to whip through this. I will skip over a couple slides because this is kind of more the huggy, touchy-feely part of the presentation, and I'm not really a huggy, touchy-feely guy. But I think the Dalai Lama, right? Love him or hate him. Again, there's a story about the Dalai Lama that I thought was fantastic, right? And this section really I want to dive into us as leaders, as future leaders in cybersecurity, GRC, whatever your sort of career track is from the standpoint of your profession. But the story kind of goes like this. A mother brings her son to the Dalai Lama. She says, Dalai Lama, can you please tell my son to stop eating sugar? He said, come back in 3 weeks. She's like, what are you talking about? He's like, just come back in 3 weeks and we'll be good. So 3 weeks passes, she comes back, brings her son in front of him. He said, son, don't eat sugar, it's not good for you. So she's like, thank you. So they turn to go away. She's like, she could not help herself. She said, why did you tell me to come back in 3 weeks? You could just said this simple statement to them. He said, I had to stop eating sugar, right? So sort of like, walk the walk, lead from the front type sort of scenario there, right? So we as leaders and future leaders, we've got to do this. Always be closing. I'm gonna kind of talk through some human hacking related things that I think are foundational for us as individuals to sort of focus on, right? I mean, some of you might be in sales, some of you haven't been in sales. I would purport that every single person in this room is a salesperson. You've sold yourself to your significant other, your bosses, the board of directors in some circumstances, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes down to being able to sell, there's three main things that I think you have to sort of exhibit or sort of focus on. High performance belief systems, right? These are the things that dictate your actions, perceptions, and those perceptions create your reality. And then high self-confidence, right? I mean, you look at a high-performing salesperson, very, very self-confident, portray themselves in a very positive manner, very focused on positive outcomes, not negative outcomes. And then strong will, right? You got to be able to take a no. You got to be able to sort of have sort of constructive conflict and be able to navigate that in terms of being a professional. One of the things I want to kind of take a sidebar on is, and this is again, through my experience, what I've seen is that in terms of selling, right? Selling the board of directors, from my perspective in my career and what I've seen, and even meeting with customers who have asked us to come in and help them in certain circumstances, that they're just not able to sell to the board of directors. I think there's a disconnect there, especially when it's in the executive realm where there are CISOs out there that just cannot sort of translate and speak that second language of tech speak to executive speak. So I think we've got to all learn as leaders to really speak like the execs do, right? You got to speak in terms of business impact, acceleration, or enablement of the business. And I think the final thing is metrics, metrics, and metrics. Those are what gain you the money from that standpoint. Human psychology. I'll kind of whip through the next couple. Human psychology. I'm not asking you to go out to get a degree, but focus on human psychology or aspects of it, right? So cognitive psychology, developmental psychology, industrial organizational psychology, right? Knowing how people think within organizations and work-life balance, things of that nature, right? How do you connect with your humans that you're leading? And then personality psychology, right? The things that influence your thoughts, behaviors, perceptions, realities. Psychometrics, I'll whip through this real quick. From a psychometrics perspective, right, think Myers-Briggs sort of tests and personality tests. I mean, does anyone leverage that in their organizations in terms of knowing what the personalities of your team is? I mean, I've done it in almost every organization I've ever been. Even in the government, we did it. I think it's a fantastic way to kind of get to know your teammates and things of that nature. Who knows who this is? Andrew Huberman, right? Fantastic neuroscientist, Stanford guy. I will say that I'm either perplexed or enlightened by his podcasts. That guy talks over my head more so than not. But again, when you look at it from a neuroscience perspective, I mean, I would encourage everyone to go out there and at least kind of learn about this. Again, I'm not telling you to go out there and become a neuroscientist, but I think there's elements of this in terms of like some techniques. I meditate every single day. It helps me kind of keep grounded and stuff. I'm not, I guess people kind of look at that as sort of like, you're huggy, touchy, feely yoga type guy, but I'm not. You've got to kind of be introspective and look internally. Nootropics, I mean, again, I'm not talking about going out and taking magic mushrooms and stuff. I mean, creatine, ginkgo biloba, that type of stuff, right? Don't go out there. Hopefully no one becomes a drug addict after this. Behavioral modification, right? I mean, the behavioral modification related to cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, that sort of stuff, right? Sort of, creating those outcomes for yourself in terms of, your profession, your life, so to speak. And then I think it kind of all reels into, influence and persuasion. I mean, I'm not asking you to go out there and read books. I read books. I read lots of them. When it comes to human hacking, I think it really focuses on influence and persuasion. I mean, Jon's stories, it's about influence and persuasion. I mean, to me, that's everything. We're always influencing and persuading as leaders.
Skip, I think we may be running out of time.
Yeah, I got like 1 minute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I got 1 minute. I'm sorry. Social Engineering, 2 fantastic books. I'd encourage these. These books are fantastic. Everyone's using social engineering. Politicians, attorneys, psychologists, doctors, computer hackers, con artists. Why wouldn't security professionals be using this to shape your security dynamics in the humans at your organization? Government intelligence agencies also use this that I just found out. I'm going to start watching myself in my communications on Teams.
Too late.
All right, so I'm going to leave you with this, right? This is my other favorite Bruce, right? Again, don't take what Jon and Skip are telling you. Go out there, do independent inquiry. I mean, you need to search for your truth from that perspective. Don't depend on someone else's view or a mere book. But I just wanted to say thank you. I'm sure you took some of this in a good way. If this really sucked, let me know as well. I'm going to be around for the rest of the day. I think I'll be on the panel as well. So appreciate everyone's time today, and thanks for going over a little bit.
Okay.